My pleasure to welcome our incredible speaker, Dr. Judy Montgomery, who's conducting our presentation today.
Thank you very much. Pleased to have all of you join us. Welcome in. You should be looking soon at our first number of slides so that you see some disclosure information that is required each time, and also our learning outcomes. As participants, you will be able to, at the end of this, differentiate 4 types of vocabulary, estimate vocabulary size and type at several age levels, and explain at least 3 evidence-based interventions found in the Bridge of Vocabulary. Our agenda is clear. We're taking some introductions first. Then we'll be looking at each one of the areas that I just read to you. And before our wrap-up, we'll have an opportunity to have a question and answer period. Let's begin with vocabulary knowledge. It's an interesting term. Usually we see vocabulary intervention or vocabulary acquisition or vocabulary acquiring, vocabulary methods, vocabulary knowledge is a new term in many ways. What happens with vocabulary is we begin to set the stage for learning. We need to know how vocabulary develops so that the knowledge drives the vocabulary, all the words that our clients need and acquire, and also that the vocabulary drives the knowledge in turn. So the more words we know, the greater our knowledge. As our knowledge grows, the more words we need. So we'll be using the term vocabulary knowledge today in order to set the stage for the kind of learning we'd like to have occur. Let's look at vocabulary knowledge. Many of these statements will be quite familiar to you. First of all, vocabulary is knowledge is a preeminent predictor of success in learning to read. It is the predictor of success in learning to read, the best one, the top one, the highest one. Again, not a surprise to us. One of the most visible aspects of language acquisition in children, the number of words you know, the way you use your words, your knowledge of vocabulary. So it's a very visible aspect of language acquisition in children, and of course in adolescents, in adults. It doesn't change. The more words we know, the more words we use. The more we use, the greater our vocabulary grows, the greater our knowledge grows as well. Very closely intertwined. Vocabulary knowledge also points out the way that we can set high-achieving students apart to some degree from less successful ones. The greater the vocabulary, the more we see that child or that adolescent as a vocabulary user, as a person who is able to grasp how vocabulary works. And that means the more words we'll learn. So vocabulary knowledge here also drives the size of the vocabulary. Of course, we know that schools place a high priority on providing effective vocabulary instruction. It matters in our educational system. We also know that it defines early readers. Children who are 3 or 4 and appear to be reading, appear to be memorizing the words, using them in the right way, being able to retell a story when they're very young, are early readers. They're on their way to knowing what reading's all about. So vocabulary knowledge defines an early reader. We say, look how many words he knows. Also, when you read to children, we literally entertain them with the sounds of words and with the meanings of words. They watch our mouth as we're saying the words. They gaze at our face as we're reading stories. They're looking back at the picture book. They're looking back at the letters at the bottom. So vocabulary knowledge also defines the way children are entertained, literally, by the sounds and meanings of words. 2 more. Vocabulary knowledge also points out that a vocabulary standard is there and evident at every grade level of the Common Core, or the Common Core state standards, depending on how you use the term in your part of the country. Every grade level has a vocabulary standard. Every grade level. There's no such thing as every once in a while there's no vocabulary to teach. It couldn't happen. It doesn't happen. So there isn't a year, there isn't a time There isn't a period of learning that does not include vocabulary. And then finally, oh my gosh, there's a bottomless pool of new words to grasp and to learn and to hold onto and to use. We cannot use them up. We can't get finished early and have a couple of years without vocabulary. It doesn't work that way. So as we talk about vocabulary knowledge, you see what I'm referring to here. It is like acquisition. It's something like development. But first, it's really the knowledge that vocabulary drives for us. Here's a wonderful quote. The number of words in a child's vocabulary is an indicator of his or her linguistic health and a factor in his or her ability to use language in varied contexts and for multiple purposes. A very rich definition. And then notice the amazing part in here. The number of words in a child's vocabulary is an indicator of his or her, oh my gosh, linguistic health. Have you ever used a term like that? I invite you to do that. You're helping with the knowledge of vocabulary to assure linguistic health. So see where you can put that into your daily practice of our exciting field, and especially of vocabulary, and say, we're really improving linguistic health. It's a wonderful way to envision this part of vocabulary. Today we're going to engage with these ideas in a number of different ways. We're going to look here at top 10 evidence-based practices in vocabulary acquisition. There's the word. How do we acquire vocabulary? We're going to look at the top 10 evidence-based practices or evidence-based strategies. We use the word strategies. We're also going to be looking at tasks that are laid out by those strategies. We're going to look at a student progress monitoring form. It's very important to be able to monitor change in children, and I'm going to introduce you to a progress monitoring form that I find very valuable and I think will make the process of monitoring and collecting progress much easier. We're then going to look at the Q Global Platform. How does this enhance our ability to reach into the information that's available about Bridge of Vocabulary? And we're going to finish with a sample intervention activity in which we pull all of those items together. So we're going to use our tools in a number of different ways. So first we're going to use our tools to explore the evidence-based vocabulary strategies. We're going to read about 10 strategies in the Bridge of Vocabulary Introduction. I know you already have this information that you downloaded to follow along in our webinar today. We're going to seek some strategies that I know you are familiar with. So I'll invite you as we talk about these to make your own little list or circle it or check mark it and say, know it, do it. When you're familiar with those, let's keep track of them. Then I'd invite you to seek new strategies, some things that you aren't doing now from these 10 that you might want to explore, or you might call each one of these strategies something slightly different and say, oh, I hadn't looked at it that way before. And then we're going to plan to use multiple strategies and figure out which strategies we're going to use under what conditions. So here's that page I talked about, the top 10 evidence-based vocabulary strategies. So I think you've already downloaded this. If not, I'll be reading sections of it and you can download it later and refer to it. It's included, of course, as a link in your email invite. So this page is hard to read, of course, but it gives you the overall look. On the left side, there's a couple paragraphs on vocabulary knowledge. And then below it, you see a very multicolored tower here of the strategies, the top 10 evidence-based vocabulary strategies. And to the right, each one of them is explained. So let's look at this a little closer. And we can see now just those top 10 strategies. If they're in this category, they don't mean that one is stronger or better than 2 or 3, or that number 6 is more potent than number 7 or number 8. They are not in a hierarchy. Rather, they are simply all together as the top 10. And this comes from looking through the research and culling the information that we have from the last 35 years of looking at vocabulary knowledge. So we're going to touch on a couple of these. There isn't time to do all of them, but I'll give you a feel for how they're used. So now we're going to look in a little bit more depth here I pulled out 3 of them. Here's strategy 2. So if we look back here, the strategy 1 is for word types. Very important to be able to look at word types and recognizing, again, from the information that we have that there are 4 different ways that we're going to look at words. Then we're going to take a look more deeply at number 2. So strategy 2 are tier 2 words. I think many of you probably know this one. There are 3 tiers of vocabulary that have been recently identified by Beck, McEwen, and Kukin. Their most recent book is the one in 2013, but they introduced the idea in 2002. The idea of tiered words allows you to purposely target which of the 3 types of words you want to teach and when you want to teach them. It's not a matter of picking certain words from a certain tier and just stay at that tier, but rather to decide under what conditions you're going to increase the vocabulary knowledge, that is, teach it, practice it, you remediate in it, intervene in it, and then when you'll do that, and maybe not in the order of 1, 2, and 3. So that means you really need to have a pretty good idea of how those tiers operate. Tier 1 are basic words. The sight words, the words we know from early readers, words that refer to food and colors and prepositions. Most of them are going to be nouns. English is a very noun-heavy language, and as a result, there are many labels and many names. We consider it very important to have a name for everything. And other languages are not quite as heavy in nouns as English is, but that's how English works. There's about 5,000 words in Tier 1, so don't worry, you won't run out. To give you an idea about how some of them might fit in that category, you'll see in the introduction to Bridge of Vocabulary on page 3 that there are examples of the words for Tier 1. So if you're a note taker, I can give you some ideas here. They're going to be words such as house, dog, friend, yellow, hot, dance, shoes, phone, over, happy, book, answer, old. They're not all one-syllable words. Sometimes they're 2 syllables. They're rarely 3 syllables. But they are the basic sight words, early words that we're going to be coming into play when children are early readers. Let's jump to Tier 2 now. These are high-frequency words. We know them from our academic teaching environment, from the courses we take. They are not noun-heavy. They are verb-heavy. Oftentimes they are adjective-heavy. They have multiple meanings. So tier words would have some examples such as gather, announce, expensive, conflagration, torch, ignore, density, vintage. Words that we rarely stop and say, let's talk about that word. Let's make sure we know what it means. Instead, in Tier 2, we come across them as we're learning other things. And sometimes our instructors, our teachers, our speech-language pathologists will stop and point them out and highlight them. And other times we'll say, that's just kind of a difficult word. Here's an easier word for it. When you want to do your vocabulary work in Tier 2, you want to focus on those words. You want to pull them out, talk about them, because they're rarely directly taught. Let's pull out one more strategy. Oops, I didn't do 3 here. I should have. Let's look at Tier 3. These are much lower frequency words. They're usually in specific domains, and they usually are specialty content. We'll get them in the upper grades from grades 8, 9, 10, 11, when we are talking about specific kinds of things that have to do with the learning that's going on in the classroom. Quite different than Tier 2 words. Let me give you a couple to jot down. Words like chasm, lathe, legislature, implode, medieval, sulfur, photosynthesis. Words that have to do with a content area that's being taught. We wouldn't run across those words otherwise, except we are now learning that content. So that gives us strategy 2 here, which is Tier 2 words. Starting with Tier 2, recognizing when we need to start with 1 instead of 2, going to 2 periodically so that we get reinforcement for what's going on in the classroom, and then knowing when we're moving into Tier 3 words that these are much lower frequency. We may not use them again when we're adults unless we're involved in things like art or music or history or science, and then we need to know those contents. So those are the concepts around tiered words. Let's look at a third strategy here. This is the concept of dense neighborhoods. Some of you may know this from other terms, and you'll see as we're looking at the definition. Working in dense neighborhoods is a powerful place to be. The denser the neighborhood, the more alike words are with each other, the greater chance that students and children will learn them. Words that are considered similar could be similar phonologically. They sound similar. They may only have one sound or letter difference. Pit, pat, pet, pot, hit, fit. They are phonologically alike. They look alike. They sound somewhat alike, but they're all individually different. They also could be dense because they're semantically alike. So categories like animals, food, characters in a story, sports, those things in which words are grouped by their neighborhood, by the things that they are alike in meaning, that is to say, semantically. And then in usage is another possibility for a dense neighborhood. For instance, prepositions. When you get the opportunity to work with prepositions, don't stop with in and on and under. Move on to beyond and surrounding, so that when you're talking about words in a dense environment, they're easier to learn than words in a sparse environment. So Hoover Historical pointed this out to us in 2007 with some wonderful research, and my hunch is that many of you know it already. It's a strong strategy for teaching in the areas of vocabulary. Here's another strategy in word categories. This one is introducing words in a highly organized manner. McGregor and Duff talked about this very recently in 2015. It builds for powerful semantic fields. So it takes some of the ideas from the previous strategy and extends them. The more organized a manner that you can present new words, sorting a few at a time and keep building within that category, and linking the words to each other, not teaching or introducing words as alone, but as part of something bigger. So organizing words, explaining your organization. These words go together for this reason. Sometimes charting it, depicting it, drawing it, strengthens the vocabulary growth and the memory. So the strategy of word categories is indeed very powerful. Here's a couple of examples on the bottom of this page. You could have a word category like items found in a street. And then students have to think about that. You might have a picture to prompt them. Perhaps they're only thinking of their street or the street in front of the school or the street that they walk on often when they go to play baseball. Foods that provide protein. Wow, there's a tough one. How do we know that one? We have to know what protein is. What kind of foods would have that? Let's put it in a group. Let's try all these different ones, perhaps with pictures, perhaps with words, and perhaps orally only. Animals that can fly, words that mean old. So you see when we do the word categories, these are going to be highly organized and you're going to be explaining your organization system. We'll show some examples of that as well. So we're going to use our tools now one more way. We're going to collect our student progress easily. Very important for us to do data collection. And many clinicians will be asking, how do I do this during a busy day, during a busy clinical time, during a therapy session? I can't be taking notes at the same time that I'm providing therapy. And you're right, you probably can't. We are offering you a progress monitoring form we'll take a look at here for a moment. It's a way to collect data once a session or once a week and then study it. And I really encourage you to think about, when am I going to collect that data? Not every time I'm doing therapy. You won't. You'll go kind of crazy trying to provide therapy, thinking about what's doing, and recording at the same time. So decide when your data is going to be collected and then collect it at that time. Once each session at the end, once a week. At the end of a week, you'll be collecting data because you see the child once or twice or three times, and then to study it. So, don't make yourself crazy with trying to do progress monitoring. You want to determine if the child's improving. That's the whole idea of it. And then you have to decide if you need to repeat what you're doing. you need to change what you're doing, if you need to advance to a new strategy. That's why we do it. So let's take a look at the Progress Monitoring Forum. That comes with a Bridge of Vocabulary too, so that you can see it's designed for you already. Here's what one page looks like. It's fairly easy to do. You can hold a page on one side, and while you're asking the child or children to respond, you can be making fairly quick kinds of entries into this. So let's look at it. It has 4 parts to it. The first one is who's the student, name or initials, age, grade, classroom teacher, or whoever you kind of report to as one of the people that's following this child with you. So somebody else is noticing this vocabulary growth too. And there's you as a professional completing this form. Then under the activity, you're going to put the activity code, which of course is given to you by the information in the book of Bridge of Vocabulary 2. The activity title, you want to know what you worked on, and then later on when you're keeping these, you can tell what you were collecting your data on, the date, the number of minutes that you spent on this, and what kind of a session type you had. So that's the top portion. The next portion is the data collection during the activity. Probably many of you do it in a similar format. Make it easy for yourself. Do everything in groups of 5. So we have 5 boxes. That means you're able to collect the data easily. When the student has responded correctly, they get a slash. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 slashes would of course be 100%. 4 slashes is 80%. 3 slashes is 60%. Very easy for you to make slash, slash. Didn't do that one correctly, slash, didn't do that one correctly. I could look at it and immediately know I'm at the 60% level. Urge you to use that type of thing. If you are already, great, keep it up. If you haven't before, consider it. And anything in groups of 5 like this will allow you to take as many of those kind of dipstick samples as you would like. Next section is to summarize what happened in this activity. Do it at the same time that you did the data collection. Try not to set it aside and let it cool. Do it while you're thinking. Did you complete the activity? Yes or no? What prompts or supports were used? Did you use visual supports? Did you verbally prompt? Did you say the word first so the child could repeat after you, repetitions? Did you give them more time? Anything else that you might have done that were a support or a prompt, which is important. And then the last section, which is to immediately look at next steps. Do that while you're filling this out. Should you repeat this activity? No or yes? Should you add another top 10 strategy? Yes or no? And if yes, which strategy? What other prompts or supports do you need? Write in what you think you should be adding. And who else needs to be involved? Who else on the team, for instance, might be able to be helpful to you at the same time? This now takes us to a section on the Q Global home screen, which you're taking a look at, and I'll turn things over to Tina Eichstedt.
Great. Thanks, Judy. I hope everybody can hear me okay. I just want to take a couple of seconds in the middle. I should introduce myself. Sorry. I'm one of the SLPs and product managers, such as Nancy Castilleja at the beginning of the call. And Judy and I worked together on the release of this new version of the Bridge of Vocabulary. So I'm just going to take a second and show you a couple of logistical screens about how you'll use the new version, because we're pretty excited about how easy it will be for you to access and how light your bag will be, because you won't have one more book to carry with you as you go from place to place. So this, what you're looking at right now, is the home screen of our Q Global system. You may know this platform because it's really our home for scoring and reporting, as well as our digital stimulus books and manuals. So there's a part of this platform that many of you may be on in that context that really lends itself to supporting your work for Judy's new product here with us. So again, this is the home screen, and if you look at the top of the home screen, I'm just going to try to highlight it here with a little arrow. There's a little place here called, my green arrow at the top here, called the Resource Library. And so that's just a link at the top of the page and your home screen for Q Global, and you just click on that when you log in. And when you do, you'll see something like this. This is the Resource Library, and in this library is a long list of all the products that we have inside Q Global. So each of them has a little name next to it and a little plus sign by the name of the product. And as you'll see on this screen, I know it's pretty small, but if you go to full screen, it'll get a little bigger. The top of the screen in the resource library is scrolled down to Bridge of Vocabulary 2. And so inside our Q Global Resource Library, there are 2 folders for every product. One is called the General folder, and one is called the Restricted folder. Everything inside the General folder is free to you when you have a Q Global account, which are also free. And so you can see all of these things that we've placed in the General folder, or the free to those of you that are inside the system to look at about the product. So here in this case for the Bridge of Vocabulary 2, we have a number of files. The first one is about, just some information about the product itself in a PDF form. The second one is Appendix B, which Judy, maybe we should talk about toward the end, sort of that alignment to academic standards, and we can share an example if we'd like to do that with the group here today. But that we're releasing for free on the website, so you can take a look at how you use the Bridge of Vocabulary 2 content in connection with your academic standards in general education. And then there's a list of 5 table of contents for each of the 5 sets of activities that we have in the Bridge of Vocabulary 2. So we have preschool and kindergarten activities, lower elementary activities, middle school activities, upper elementary activities, then middle school activities, and also some advanced practice activities. So all of those table of contents, you can see literally what are the activities within each of those sections. And then there is also a PDF file in the general folder for those top 10 strategies in sort of a book, one-page format. Not quite as nice as what Judy just showed you and the poster we delivered to you with your handout. So that is all in the general folder in Q Global. Then in the restricted folder, I'll go to the next slide, and that'll open up, and those are the actual activities that you purchase. So for each of those activities sets, depending on which one you're interested in, one or more, that fit into your caseload, you can think about which ones you want to purchase. And those are PDFs that are searchable, so you can click on things and it'll help you navigate within that PDF. They are downloadable, and they are printable. So instead of buying a physical book, like you may have done in the first version of Judy's book, The Bridge of Vocabulary, now in the second version, we've delivered these to you online in age-based way, depending on how you want to use that, and you can purchase one or more of them as we go on. So that is how you find them in our Q Global system. It's very straightforward, just like a filing system on your computer. In a general folder, which is free for everyone in the Q Global system, and then the restricted folder, which is where the actual product lives when you purchase it. Any questions we can answer in the question and answer period. And so now, Judy, I'll turn it back to you for the next section.
Thank you, Tina. Now we're going to use our tools to provide an intervention. Our plan is to use the same ideas we've been talking about, the 10 strategies, plus the viewing and the direction that we would take in order to make these apply to various concrete areas that students need to learn, and then using the progress monitoring tool. So besides the strategy, we now have the tool that helps us look at how much progress is being made. Now we're using our tool the third way, and that's to provide the actual intervention. So you could select a task by grade level. You could link it with a curriculum standard. You could request what a parent might want you to be working on. You might ask your collaborating team, your educational team, how you want to divvy up the responsibilities in the areas of vocabulary and language acquisition. Decide what makes sense. It doesn't have to be a grade level, because many of the children that we work with have language skills far below the actual grade level they're in. So the grade level doesn't help us as much. Or we might not ever get to some of the other higher level strategies if we just stayed at the grade level. Sometimes we have to jump up a little higher and develop a strategy at a higher level that now will flow back and help the strategies at the lower level. It's very interactive, and so don't feel like you have to follow step by step in a certain way. The next thing you're going to do is prepare your role and the props you might need or the materials. So I say prepare your role. Make sure you've read the one-page description of the intervention. It's always one page. You never have to turn the page and find something on the next page. It's not continued on the back someplace. Everything you need is on the one page. However, you might have some props or materials that you need. So you want to determine what those are so that you can print them out and have them there available for the students. So plan to prepare your role and props ahead of time. Like any good intervention therapy session, you don't want to be looking ahead to try to figure out where's this going and how is it going to get there. You want to be ready, but one page is very easy to get yourself ready. The next one always makes me smile. Read only the purple ink. In other words, when you're reading to the children, when you are giving them instruction, when your students and your clients are following along with what you want them to do, you are only going to read the purple ink. Because you know what? We overtalk. We have a tendency to back up and start over, to say something again 2 or 3 times, to kind of exceed the memory skills that our students have for all the information they've just been given. So if you can reduce your interest in telling them everything, read only the purple ink, and I will give you some samples of that in a moment, so you don't overtalk. If it's not understood well, go back and reread the purple ink to the children, not launch into something even longer. And then, of course, in your preparation, you want to keep track of the tasks that you have used. Make check marks in some way on your forms. Keep a list of the ones you've used, ones you intend to use again, or ones that were not as successful and you don't want to use them again. So keep track yourself of how those particular tools worked for you. So here's an activity. This is what it looks like on one page. This is the guided practice activity. It's always, as I mentioned, one page. It always has that purple stripe at the top, and it tells you what it's going to be addressing. Upper right-hand corner here, you see UE, which is upper elementary, and its code number is 1.1. So if you're looking for it again later, you jot that down someplace so you can find the page quickly. This is synonyms mean the same. It's a guided practice activity, so you as the clinician are going to be interacting with the child a great deal. It isn't a page you hand over or something they work on by themselves. You are the director of this interaction for them. Synonyms mean the same. Very important. Notice that this is about synonyms. It is not about antonyms and synonyms, although in the left-hand side you'll see that's the section that it's in, but this is just having to do with synonyms. Synonyms are more difficult for students to learn than antonyms are. Sometimes we think synonyms are easier, but they're not. Antonyms are easier, much easier, and children learn antonyms before they learn synonyms. I'm sure you're familiar with that. Easier to define and determine extreme opposites than it is to look at changes or differences that are very minute. So it's easier to know hot versus cold, high versus low, fast versus slow, in versus out. Those are all antonyms, and they're at the direct opposites, and so they're easier to differentiate, and students can learn them. Synonyms, on the other hand, are more difficult because you will already have in mind what you're trying to define, and you can't think of other words easily that mean the same thing because now you have what it means. So if you say, cold, what would be another word that means something very similar to cold? Not exactly, but pretty close. Kids jump immediately to hot or warm or something that's an opposite because antonyms are always easier. Keep it in mind. It's something that helps us remember to teach the antonyms first because they're easier, the synonyms later because they're harder. Also, kids often do not know what the word synonym means. They don't use it in any other format. They wouldn't be talking about synonyms otherwise. In fact, I'll always remember a student who was having so much trouble with synonyms and just didn't seem to be ever able to select something that was right around in the same category. And he said to me one time, which was probably the first time I heard him say the word out loud, he said, but what does it have to do with cinnamon? And it's like, of course, synonyms and cinnamon were close enough that he was thinking, well, you know what? Synonyms. What are synonyms? So anticipate that you're going to have some interesting times as you do this. So now we're looking at the upper left-hand side of this page. Here's a quick look at that. First time you're just looking at time required. If you know anything about Bridge of Vocabulary, the first edition of this, you know these little marks. Told you one little mark like this was a 5-minute activity. 2 of those little black dashes would be a 10-minute activity, and 3 of those black dashes would be a 15-minute activity. It gives you an indication of how much time to set aside for this and when to expect to stop. If you haven't finished it after 15 minutes, don't go on and on. Go back and redo it again another day. Group size tells you this is for an individual one-on-one. You could do it with a small group. There would be a couple more figures there, or even with a large group, and there would be even more figures there. Materials needed. You need the student sheet, which you're going to be reading off of, which has your information on it, and an IPW, which is the Independent Practice Worksheet. This is what students either work independently on their own or they take it home as homework. As SLPs, we typically would not send the IPW home the first time we did a task. We wait for a while and then send it home because we don't see the children every day, and that means we're more interested in what did they acquire over a period of time rather than did they memorize something, and can we give them a quick little IPW to see if they remembered it or not. So use the IPWs as you choose, but try not to put it all into one big section. Here's our guided practice activity itself. The objective is at the top. When presented with 3 words, the student will indicate which 2 words are synonyms. So now you are knowing this is what you're supposed to be doing, but you're not going to overread the definitions or overread the instructions. So these are for you. Before the lesson, print out the student sheet so the students have what they're going to work from and what you're going to work from. What's in your book is what you use. They don't use your book. They use their student sheet. Briefly explain that words with similar meanings are called synonyms. And that's all you say, that words with similar meanings are called synonyms. Ask the student to follow along in their student sheet as you present all 3 words and one of the word sets below. So follow along as you present, and then here's your information. Ask the student to indicate which 2 words mean the same thing. For example, you're going to say, explode, burst, decorate. Which 2 words mean the same thing? It's in purple ink, so that's what you're going to be saying. Listen and watch. Explode, burst, decorate. Which 2 words mean the same thing? Explode, burst, decorate. So those are the things you want the students to be focusing on. They're going to be seeing it if they're readers. Remember, this was upper elementary, so we expect reading skills at this point. They're going to be looking at text to be able to read it. You'll reinforce their correct responses. You'll teach on their incorrect responses. You can decide if you want to do that at each one of the intervals. You can decide if you want to do it after 5. And then you could have a follow-up lesson. Have the student complete the independent practice worksheet 1 week later, or use it as a review, or bring it in 1 month later and see if we can remember more about the synonyms. So this is your guided practice activity. This is your intervention. This is your therapeutic plan, and you're using particular strategies as we do this. Here's the word sets that you're going to use. Notice again they're in the purple ink because this is what you're saying aloud. These are bracketed words, are not the synonyms. This is for you. This is in the book. So the brackets tell you which one is not a synonym. The students are not seeing this. Again, purple ink, you are saying it, and they are listening to it. And they also, if they're readers, are reading it. We're giving you 10. I would do it in 2 groups of 5. So if this is the time that you're keeping track, you're making your little slash marks on the first 5. Then you'll make another set of 5 and the slash marks on 6 through 10 so that you can keep your data very easily as you're explaining what the responsibilities are. Also make sure when you're doing this that you're not saying explode, burst, decorate. Which one doesn't fit? You don't want all those extra words at the end. Which one doesn't fit? You don't want that. You don't want your voice to go up or down. You don't want to repeat synonyms over and over again. You want to be able to just focus on words if you can. We do very little of this, and the evidence-based practice shows that we need to do a lot more. Students can learn this task once they've practiced a number of different times. They also are seeing on their page 1 through 5 or 6 through 10 or 1 through 10. You present this in the way that you think is best. And then our last statement at the bottom of that page is, what's the link to the top 10 evidence-based vocabulary strategy? Well, it's a link to strategy 4. This is dense neighborhoods. This is being able to use the concept that evidence shows us makes a difference, which is finding other words that are in that same category, that have the same general meaning. And a dense neighborhood has more of those. And a more sparse neighborhood has less of those. The more I have, the more examples I have, the better it is for me and the more I'm able to learn. This takes us to our question discussion time. I'm pleased we have some time to be able to address the questions that you've been generating. Tina, let me turn it back over to you again, please, if you would moderate our question session.
I'm happy to, Judy. Thanks. I'm going to start with some of the questions we've had come through the chat box, but feel free to add more. One of the first questions, Judy, we had was back earlier in your time today, and a question about where homophones fit in. Can you talk a little bit about homophones?
Well, it's another concept. Homophones have to do with the spelling. And spelling, of course, is not a language skill. It is a reading skill. So it doesn't fit in the categories of antonyms and synonyms because those are meaning-based. But once we know how the word sounds, it could be spelled in a number of different ways. That's about the best I could say about that.
Great. Okay,
Another
thanks.
one?
A couple people have asked about just overall, what would you characterize as the big differences if I have the first version of the Bridge of Vocabulary and now I'm looking at the second version? What did we do the second time that is different?
Great question. We did some things that had to do with how much we're looking at vocabulary knowledge. And we didn't do that as much in the first one. We looked at individual pieces of it, but we didn't look at the overall concept of vocabulary knowledge. We also had in the first one the idea of state standards. So we pulled state standards from all 50 states and territories for that matter, and we said, let's try to line these up with what individual states are saying. And that meant that the goal statements could be written off that. This time we changed it and we looked at evidence-based strategies. And we started with what are the top 10 strategies and when do they occur? So that was one of the biggest overall differences. We also pulled out of the first one the most effective types of interventions and made sure to include those plus new ones and took out the ones that were less supportive of where we're going, that were not quite as effective. And in fact, we found later did not have the evidence base that we were looking for initially because they were based on a standard, not necessarily based on how children learn a particular set of skills. Then, of course, the progress monitoring tool is brand new. We didn't have that before, and that was a major change in the second one. And then we did some organizing also based on where we thought certain tasks should show up. So we moved some out of a lower elementary and put them in an upper elementary, but more likely took them out of an upper elementary or even a middle school and moved them down because we thought we have learned now that the earlier we introduce these strategies, the more likely they can be used over a longer period of time. And that was a major change for us.
Great, thanks, Judy. Here's another one. How can we ensure that students generalize that the specific words that are synonyms? That is, how do we know that they will understand the words when found in a text or when working on a composition?
I know what you're asking with that question, and it's a good one. No, we don't know for sure. The strategy that we use is repetition, because we recognize that the more often they see it, the more likely they're going to learn it, the more likely they're going to integrate it into their thinking process. And that's when we talk about vocabulary knowledge more now than just vocabulary development or acquisition. So we are reducing the early conflicts that we had in terms of when should we learn something, and realized that most kids, typical youngsters now, learn it earlier than we thought, so that when it's introduced at the grade level or the age level, they have almost half learned it already. And now it's being named and it's being organized and it's being suggested as a new idea.
Hey, Judy. Judy? Oh, I'm sorry.
Yes.
I'm sorry to interrupt you, Judy. We totally lost your audio until this last word that you just said. So your audio went really fuzzy, and it felt like you went away from us for a while. I'm sorry. Could you summarize just the last part of what you said? Yep. Just summarize that last part again.
Mm-hmm. So we are realizing that the students are actually learning these skills earlier in their educational environment than we first thought. And if they are learning them earlier, that means they get to practice them longer. So our strategies now become more repetition and more opportunity for vocabulary knowledge. So starting earlier, doing it for longer periods of time, because, of course, there's a standard at every grade level that includes vocabulary. So there's never a moment when you shouldn't be teaching vocabulary.
Great. A couple of logistical questions that we can answer, I think, pretty quickly, Judy. I think you already answered about how long the tasks are. They range, and that icon that Judy showed us earlier will tell you about how long that activity takes. And I think Judy, correct me if I'm wrong, but across all of the 127 activities across the new version, there's a nice variety.
Absolutely true. Mm-hmm.
Okay.
So one question that was in there.
Yeah, it was a question about how long the activities are, and the answer that you gave earlier was really variable.
Yeah. From those little dashes are going to be 5 minutes, 10 minutes, 15 minutes, but nobody's going to hold you to that. It just tells you how much time you ought to be setting aside for this activity or this task. So you can do it for less time, you could do it for more time. We don't encourage you to do these activities for longer than a 15-minute period of time.
Great. A question here, where did the words you chose to teach come from?
Every single one of them? No, you're saying which particular
Just in general.
Words,
just in general, like how did you source which words you chose to add into the activities?
Well, this was an interesting task because there's a number of different corpus of words. You can find different groupings of words. When I mentioned that there's 5,000 of them that several researchers have identified for Tier 1, for instance, it doesn't mean there's one list of 5,000. It means if you put all those lists together, you have about 5,000. Lots of repetition within that. So we looked at things that were classic pieces of research about which words would you teach when, and we brought those classic ones in. We also looked at ones that teachers thought were important. We looked at the number that you're expected to know and learn and which ones they are at various grade levels out of textbooks. Fascinating to see what's in textbooks. Those of you who work with middle school or high school students, when you pull out that vocabulary, especially Tier 3, you're amazed at how many words are expected. So we pulled from a lot of different things. We recognized that giving people a list of 5,000 words wouldn't be helpful, or even a list of 400 words wouldn't be helpful. Instead, it's what types of words, so that when you begin to find those in textbooks, teachers identify them for you, you go away from what had been a practice for many years, and that was to go to the spelling words. Let's look at what the spelling words are going to be this week or this month, and assume that if they're like difficult spelling words, if they're the ones that are hardest to remember the order of letters, that those would somehow be the best ones for oral language. And of course, they are not. They don't hold up when you test them that way. So we stayed away from the looking up the spelling words, instead looked at what's happening in that child's environment and where are those words coming from. And textbooks are a great source of that, as well as anything that's happening in the early grades, because those are going to be sight words, which is a group that you can pull it from. It's also going to be the words that fit into the categories that we've been talking about.
Great, thanks, Judy. Here's one about the 10 strategies. Are the 10 evidence-based vocabulary strategies geared to focus on teaching the speaking type of vocabulary, since the types of vocabulary are distinctly different and, quote, best taught with distinctly different methods?
Mm-hmm. Right, that is word for word from a strategy, right. So they're not all designed for oral, but they start with oral and then they move into reading and more literacy-based. As I mentioned, they stay away from spelling, but they become, again, more focused on what is being taught in a school-based situation. School is students' work. That's how they spend their days, so we want to take the content from there. And then when we get into the upper grades, we know it's also for writing purposes. And that means they're going to be hearing it and saying it and writing it and analyzing it and thinking about it. So we began to use methodology that has been around for a fairly long time, and that's Bloom's taxonomy, and looking at how we use our vocabulary to get all the way up to the creative level. And even though we start at just a recognizing level, and then we move step by step up to the more creative level. So that's how we pull them together. They are heavily oral. If you look at all of them, you'll see more oral than anything else. But children do less talking as they get older in their classrooms and more writing. So we get more writing examples. So the IPWs become more writing heavy as the students get older.
Great. Here's another question. We're doing great on time. I've got lots of questions that are coming through. One is, my learners are still at the Tier 1 words at a very low level and may not read past a first grade level. Shouldn't I just focus on Tier 1 words for a better foundation?
That's a wonderful question, because it says, shouldn't I just focus on? And I think the important thing here is not just anything. But if they're going to be stuck at this Tier 1 level for a significantly long period of time, it gets boring and it gets same old, and it's hard to keep the enthusiasm up because it appears to be the same kinds of things, even if it's not the same words, for a long period of time. So what many of us like to do is jump into Tier 2 words and jump into Tier 3 words. 2 words because you get to pull out some very interesting kinds of words that you otherwise would not have gotten a chance to do that. And Tier 3 because it can be an area of great interest. So when kids are interested in music or science or planets, why not pull those special words out from Tier 3, not hundreds of them, but like 10 that belong to you, because they're all about the planets and astronomy and spaceships, and wow, that makes you want to learn. So use your best judgment to pull in Tier 2 and Tier 3 words, and then go ahead and identify that you've done that. Not just that every once in a while we got to sneak over and take some, but rather we intentionally take what would have been focused on early reading words and now jump into the more fun words. Kids have fun words in mind all the time, and they'll say things that surprise you, and you say, wow, that word really mattered to them. So I used to have a board up all the time in my therapy room that said surprise words. And anytime somebody said a word that surprised me, I'd say, oh my gosh, it's a surprise word. I've got to write it on a card. Could you go and put it on our surprise word board? And they got excited because I got excited. But that's because they were words that they cared about.
Great. Thanks, Judy. I have a few logistics questions that I want to answer from people about accessing and timing and release and things like that. So I want to do that right at the end. So hang on. I'm going to let Judy answer one more question, and then we'll clean up some of these logistics questions from all of you, and I'll show and tell a couple of things on my desktop. The last one has come up a couple times now since we talked about homophones. People are asking about homonyms and multiple meaning words. So one question in particular is, many vocabulary goals include homonyms and multiple meaning words. Do some of the activities focus on teaching words in these groupings, and is this effective?
This is something I've struggled with for a long time. My first answer to that is no, they're not particularly effective, because we never look at those words with those titles around them as adults. We don't say, I'm trying to think of a homonym right now. It just is not a category. So it doesn't have a semantic pull for us. It doesn't make it easy for us to remember if we can remember the label for it. So I don't look at those as important. It's why those are not in the top 10 strategies. They're great for classroom teachers. I applaud them. They need to be teaching those words. That's what students need to have. But from people who are looking at vocabulary knowledge, or looking at bringing along kids for whom this skill is very difficult, let's not make it more difficult by saying, and now you need to know the labels for this.
Great. Thanks, Judy. As we wrap up here, I am going to just share my screen, because a lot of you are asking, logistically, what do we have in the different activities? So you should be seeing my screen here, which is showing the table of contents for upper elementary as an example. Each set of the 5 activities has about 24 to 27 activities per grouping, so 24 to 27 middle school activities, about 25 in each area. So here's the antonyms and synonyms section for upper elementary, classification and categorization, compound words, meaning and usage, storytelling, word parts, and wordplay. So what we've done is we've given you a table of contents for each of the 5 sets of activities, including the advanced practice activities. And so that answers, I think, that question, a couple of them that have come through. But I also want to answer the timing. This is pre-publication. We are about 3 days from release on Q Global. So if you have a Q Global account, I know people are already looking as we're talking and can't find it. You can find it in the general folder information, but we are releasing this Saturday. So by Monday next week, you should be able to access it, and that each of those activity sets can be purchased separately or as a collection as you need to. You'll access it with a free Q Global account if you don't have one, and so you can purchase that through our website, pearsonclinical.com. And I know there are other questions, and we'll try to get to them with Judy after the fact and send them out or put them on our website. But we're out of time, and I really want to thank Judy for giving us an hour of her time today, and thank all of you for attending. Judy, any last words?
I enjoyed talking about vocabulary knowledge. I thank you for your questions. Many are extremely stimulating. You're thinking about the right things. Go out there and do a great job. Thank you.
Thanks, Judy, and thanks, everyone. Have a great rest of your day.